Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is a continuation of the Biota podcast. For more information on the Biota podcasts, check out biota.org/podcast. Well, I'd like to welcome all the folks that are listening to Biota Live for the first time, or potentially to the podcast for the first time, who heard about Biota Live through the Floss Weekly interview. For folks wanting to call in, the call-in number is 646-200-0640. And for people not interested to call the US number, there is an active chat room that you can reach via the Blog Talk Radio page, which you can get to via biota.org/podcast. This evening's topic is going to be slightly different than what was originally billed. We're hoping to have Michael Riley of New Scientist on the podcast. The topic next week is yet to be determined, so if you'd like to submit a topic, please get in contact, tom@nobleape.com, or we could continue with one of the topics to date. So if you're interested in submitting a topic for next week's show, please get in contact. It will be Friday, July the 18th at 8 p.m. Pacific. Well, plenty of Biota-related news. 600 Biota CDs went out in the mail yesterday. I received 1,000 of them. I still have 400 left, which will go out in smaller parcels. However, if you're interested, if your university or institution, or even probably extended group of friends or user groups or things of this nature would like some Biota CDs, some Biota podcast CDs, please get in contact, tom@nobleape.com. They're going to go very quickly. I have about 200 to kind of subdivide, which will leave probably a dwindling number as more and more are passed out. So if you would like some Biota CDs, now is the time to get in contact, tom@nobleape.com. They will be handed out at Artificial Life 11. I got great feedback yesterday from the Artificial Life 11 folk that it will be part of the conference proceedings. There will be not a lot of stuff passed out, so the Biota CDs will have particular prominence. Well, Grey Thumb-related news. I have a lot of Grey Thumb-related news. Tonight, or probably about 8 hours ago in the UK, Bruce Damer and Justin Lyon had a discussion. Bruce Damer presented the Evo grid, and Justin Lyon had some discussion with regards to the background of Grey Thumb. It was at the British Computer Society, and as of, I think, Thursday about lunchtime, there were 53 registered guests. My suspicion is that it could have gotten up to 60 on the night itself. But yeah, an amazing number of people, and it's a good indication that the Grey Thumb community is getting out there. We have our first caller. Hello, first caller.
Hey, this is Mike Riley in San Francisco.
Good to talk to you, Mike. I'm just going through some news and notes, and then we'll get on to talking to you. But yeah, some of it relates to Grey Thumb Silicon Valley, so when I get to that, I'll bring you in as well. Possibly an amazing discussion in London today. I'm waiting for video footage. I'll probably post the video footage when I receive it in the Grey Thumb blog. However, yeah, it no doubt was an amazing discussion with a lot of people, and I'm sure it went on well past the official time. Grey Thumb Brighton-related news. I had an email this morning from Jamie Matthews to update me with regards to the progress of Grey Thumb Brighton. I'm covering Grey Thumb Brighton because it's an interesting group of folks, and it's a good example of a relatively small group that may actually grow to the size of Grey Thumb San Francisco or potentially even Grey Thumb London. Jamie Matthews got in contact with Iman Harvey, folks who will remember, I think it was the Entropy podcast that I did with Jeffrey Ventrella, and I want to say Travis Savo. We mentioned Iman Harvey's work, particularly his Artificial Life 11 or A-Life 11 conference track associated with those kind of topics. Iman Harvey's a fascinating fellow. He bends into artificial life and artificial intelligence and a good deal of philosophy and psychology as well. So he would be a fascinating person to have as a speaker at the first Grey Thumb Brighton. The view is after A-Life 11, things will be a little bit calmer, and this has historically been the case with regards to the A-Life conferences as well. So, Mike, Grey Thumb Silicon Valley will be meeting on July 29th, another Tuesday, at, I believe, SRI International, where they've met previously. And the two topics, one is from Zan Gill, and it relates to a mythical character who created the Minotaur and then built a labyrinth around the Minotaur, and in fact was imprisoned in the labyrinth and tried to escape from the labyrinth, but it is in fact a great metaphor for the creation of artificial life. And whether we get lost in our own creations or whether we should emerge, whether artificial life is a threat or a tool for problem solving or potentially both. And also, Biota Live's own Scott Schaefer will be demoing that live. And I'm not sure if he's demoed that before, but it looks quite a bit different to the stuff that he's demoed previously. I guess, Mike, this will be your first official Grey Thumb.
Yes, it will. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And I'm not sure, have you had a chance to look at the previous videos, either of Silicon Valley or of Boston?
I haven't yet. I did have a nice chat with Bruce Damer a couple of weeks ago about it, and it just sounds terrific. I can't wait to see some of these things. Now, are these something like that life? Is that something that is out there in the community already, or is it something that everyone will be seeing for the first time?
Well, the announcement says that life is a Java-based, open-source and open-ended platform for artificial life development. It doesn't give a clear indication. I mean, ironically, for example, we were talking about the artificial life of plants a couple of weeks ago, and Stefan referred to the fact that the project was open source, but the source code wasn't currently available. And I've had a very interesting week communicating with OSI with regards to open source licensing of Noble Ape. And it's quite interesting what open source actually, it seems to mean a variety of things to a variety of people. So I'm not sure, actually, whether that life is currently available. My understanding is possibly that Scott Schaefer will be looking to launch it at the Grey Thumb and to get people involved. But certainly, Bruce he has a farm of artificial life projects, of which Noble Ape is one, and Jeffrey Ventrella's Gene Pool, and I think he may have Darwin at Home. I know he has Darwin's Park on his machine, and when he does his artificial life demos, he pulls up, 3 or 4 of these already existing artificial life programs that are out there. But I think people use this method of using Grey Thumbs as means of launching projects is relatively new. The Boston folk previously did talks where existing projects were discussed, and they also did some kind of show and tell component. But what's going on in Silicon Valley currently and also in London is really using Grey Thumb more as a kind of launch for projects. So without knowing too much about this particular project of Scott Schaefer's, it may actually be a launch specifically.
Yeah, well, that's a really good thing. I mean, as somebody who covers the field to some extent, I feel like I don't even really know where the cutting edge is. And what I mean when I say that is, I would love to be able to say with some certainty, what sort of complex behaviors can be simulated in a compelling way right now. Whether you're talking about ant colony simulation, plant life, or an artificial or some kind of neural network that resembles, a very simple brain situation. I don't know really how far you can go with that. I've written about things that are really compelling. Some of the work out of Ibn Harvey's group has been really interesting, simulating infant behavior, human infant behavior. But I don't know that whether or not we can say, okay, this behavior is something that we can simulate, or this level of complexity is something that we can simulate, and the next one we can't yet. And does the community, does everyone understand one another on that level, and I'm just missing it, or is it a little bit more distributed that really not everyone is talking to each other yet?
Well, I think that's certainly one of the broad aims for things like this internet radio show and also Grey Thumb specifically.
I think that's the real utility of Grey Thumb. At least that's one of the utilities of it. It's one of the really useful things that it can do. And that's what's making me excited about going later this month, is this idea that finally people can come together, and I can get a sense of, for me, this is my own sort of selfish interest, but is to get an idea of what's going on in the field, and sort of tap that collective mind and see, the zeitgeist, if you want, and see what's being talked about now.
Certainly. Well, the last piece of official business is just to say for folks listening in who would also like to participate in the discussion, the call-in number is 646-200-0640, and we have an active chat room as well for folks who want to participate via chat. But Michael, as we have you on, can you give some introduction to the listeners in terms of your background and how you got interested in artificial life?
Sure, absolutely. It's not long now, but I've been a reporter for New Scientist for 2 years, and I write about all different subjects, but the ones that are closest to my heart are actually earth science. I'm a former geologist, and artificial intelligence and robotics. And those are the things that I enjoy covering the most, and so I try to spend as much time as I can on them. And, I guess I really got into robotics probably about 1.5 years ago, covering something at the American Geophysical Union, so more on the earth science side. These were a pair of robots, autonomous underwater vehicles that were designed by researchers at Woods Hole to go under the ice in the Arctic and autonomously retrieve samples of life that had never been seen before on the Gackle Ridge. So we're talking about the Gackle Ridge, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an obscure place. It's near the North Pole. It's underneath, for the moment anyway, it's underneath the polar ice caps, and it's 5,000 meters down. It's really deep. So we're talking about 3 miles of water. And these researchers at Woods Hole designed 2 robots about the size of a car each to go down and autonomously find life, basically. Look around amongst the rocks and pick up things that looked alive to them and then bring them back up to the ship. And I thought, I just was spellbound by the idea of that. It's the closest thing that we have on this planet, really, to alien life. It's essentially, it's been isolated for millions of years. We have no idea what's down there, and we're sending robots to go get it. So that got me started. And then it wasn't long until I found myself in Lisbon at the Artificial Life Conference last fall, and getting acquainted with Inman and his group and several other very interesting groups there and their work.
Yeah, no, it sounded like a fascinating conference. Have you also written for Wired as well?
I have, yeah. I was previously I have, and I write on and off there as well, yeah.
Okay, so that's a beautiful Venn between kind of science and technology, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So specifically, how did you hear about Grey Thumb?
That's a really good question. I came across Bruce Damer's name and was interested in his idea of EvoGrid. That was where I first picked up on it, and I thought, this is really useful because, like I said, I think that you have this collective mind of researchers out there that really, it's not collective yet. There's a potential here for some seriously profound simulation and artificial life simulation that can tell us interesting things about how different organisms interact in the world that systems ecologists would be interested in and biologists would be interested in. And I think therein lies the power of artificial life simulation is to tell us things about real life. There are many other things that it can do, and the applications that are out there show that it is doing. But one of them is to inform us about the mysteries of the natural world, and in a computerized setting, an electronic setting. And I think that to me was the hook. And so that's where I saw EvoGrid, and then I found Bruce Damer, and then all of a sudden I was listening to your Artificial Plant Life podcast.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It was probably a good place to start. So one of the things being a practitioner of artificial life, and certainly the audience to Biota Live is a combination of practitioners, advanced users, folks that are just getting into artificial life, a wide variety of folk. But as a journalist going to the conference in Lisbon, what were your predetermined views associated with artificial life before you actually started to immerse yourself in the artificial life community? Wow,
that's a good question. I don't know that I had any. I didn't know exactly what artificial life was. I guess I understood the intent to try and create artificially intelligent organisms, software robots, if you want, that could perform certain tasks and have and exhibit behaviors. But I didn't know much beyond that, and even that was a very cloudy view at best. It was just from what I gleaned from going through the abstracts. And I was lucky because that conference was a single track. So I was able to sit there and listen to every single thing that everyone had to say. Every speaker, the whole audience was focused on them. And for me, that allowed me to just absorb so much about the philosophy of the field and indeed a lot about the practitioners and the state of the art to some extent. And to speak with a guy like Inman, who, as you say, really does have his finger on the pulse of the philosophy of artificial intelligence, and it's in the way that its practitioners try to approach questions like theory of mind, the big picture questions. He's really got his finger on that. So I had almost no preconceptions is really the short answer to your questions. I was kind of just blown away by the whole thing and the profundity of what was being discussed and the potential for some of the research there. I thought was just spellbinding.
Yeah, this is the idea of the kind of philosophical stickiness of artificial life, which I think brings in folks such as yourself. So that was a beautiful account. Now, you've had the chance to be exposed to a wide variety of technologies and science movements. Do you think there is a particular technical or scientific movement that artificial life can learn from?
Do I think there's a movement that artificial life can learn from?
Like a historical movement, in terms of, your background with regards to the earth sciences or technology movements that you've observed previously?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of getting in touch with the artificial intelligence, the roots of artificial intelligence, because in the 50s and 60s, when artificial intelligence was first getting off the ground, there was seemingly endless promise for the field, right? I mean, we were going to have, HAL-like robots, not evil ones, but robots that could do anything. Their intelligence was limitless. Their capabilities for simulating human behavior and thought were just around the corner. And, people were really wide-eyed about that, and rightly so. I mean, the hype kind of exceeded the technical capability of the time. But I think that right now we're getting to a point where we can start to talk in those sort of grand ways again, and back those words up with real deeds. I say we, but I mean you and practitioners, the people who are actually doing the research. I'm an interested observer, so I shouldn't say we. But what I mean to say is that now that potential is really starting to be realized, and that isn't to say that before there were some dark ages of AI. It's just that what I'm seeing is a certain renaissance, a certain bridging of all of these smaller efforts and very noble and very difficult efforts that people have undertaken for decades. And now, so with something like EvoGrid, I think that's a perfect example because it's bringing together a huge field with hundreds of people working on it, potentially. And if you could get a good sampling of those people to all be involved in EvoGrid, you could see something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think people would be really dazzled by that.
Certainly. What you're describing currently is a wonder associated with the kind of internal communications of a contemporary movement, certainly with regards to artificial life. And I think being part of that, and certainly having participants come in and get, stuck in this philosophical stickiness and engage in the debates, that's something that lasers very well internally in the community. But getting that message out to a broader community, be it a science community or even a popular community, has proved very challenging. In terms of science communication, what problems do you think the artificial life community faces?
Right now, recognition. I just think that people don't understand. I wouldn't even say they don't understand what we're attempting to do or what you're attempting to do. I think they just don't even know that it exists. Artificial intelligence, even that's a huge umbrella that encompasses artificial life, but people don't penetrate even that umbrella yet. And I think that in order to bring artificial life as a buzzword, if you want, because that's really what it needs to become. Anything in order to capture the public's imagination has to become a buzzword, has to become something that people are interested in, that they relate to. And so what I don't think that new technologies necessarily need to be developed. I think it's just a matter of framing the research in a way that relates to people. So one of the bigger stories that I wrote from the Lisbon conference last year was Rachel Wood's work simulating, like I said, infant behavior. And to me, I sat there and, my jaw hit the floor when I saw that, because here was a very simple cognitive error that all infants make for between, I think, the ages of 3 and 6 months, okay? And I won't get into the details of it, but what Rachel did was she constructed a neural network that displayed the exact same behavior. It made the exact same cognitive error in perceiving its surroundings that human babies did. And as soon as I saw that, I knew that it was instantly a story. It was so captivating, so compelling. Here you have something that humans have created that is mimicking the human behavior, and it's an emergent property, and it just captures people's imagination. So I think more things like that. I'm a curious person, I guess. So immediately when I hear something like that, I want to know more about it. But I don't think I'm the exception. I think a lot of people want to hear about that, and I think this is the problem across science communication. Honestly, it's the way, and I hate to turn it into a marketing exercise, but it's the way a piece of research is packaged. It's just you get involved in a very narrow focus in your work, and and rightly so. They're very difficult problems to tackle. Like building this neural network. So you don't worry about the sexiness of it. But I think at the end of the day, we should be concerned with the sexiness of it. If you get my drift, without compromising the research. In any way, I mean, the research is absolutely the most important. But when you want other people to know about it, you can't start off by saying, "Well, I built this neural network." You say, "Well, I was really interested in this strange cognitive thing that babies do," and people say, "Well, oh, okay, that's interesting. Why? What's that about?" And then you go into it. So it's all about the narrative, and I think bringing the narrative of each individual's research. Everybody's got one. Everybody's got a story that encompasses what they're about and why they're there. They're fascinated by something in the natural world or maybe in the computer world that they want to explore. And if you can bring that narrative forward, then I think that you can begin to draw people in, because people want to hear a story. That they want to be told something. They want a fireside chat, if you want. They want to hear that, the beginning and the middle of the drama and and obstacles that need to be overcome, and then the triumph of a successful piece of work that lends some insight into our world that we never saw before.
Yeah, no, just to echo what you're saying, I think the idea of the narrative, but particularly talking to users. I mean, the problem with artificial life developers, as you've noted, with regards to science in general, in some regard, is the immersive wonder that one can get kind of developing these things. But users oftentimes capture that in a perfect way. And as you talk to users and as you get these kind of stories, you collect a set of stories. I'm not sure if you heard the PLOS Weekly interview I did recently. But that was a collection, in some regard, a collection of successful stories that I have picked up over the past 13 years developing Noble Ape. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a critical skill to weave that into a narrative and work out which stories work and which stories don't work. So, I mean, in some regards, you've described this from scientists, as going and talking to scientists. The artificial life conferences, in some regard, are semi-elitist, certainly, for the audience of Biota Live. And I think what interested me doing Biota Live specifically was I wanted to give a setting which was in some regard an anti-conference in terms of having people that had developed their own artificial life projects that weren't necessarily affiliated with universities or institutions or companies that had been tinkerers but had some insight or something to add to the discussion. So, I mean, this is the reason that I created Biota Live fundamentally. In terms of these hobbyists or individual artificial life developers, how do you think they can spread their message of their particular project in perhaps in contrast to the academics or the people attending conferences that have exposure to people such as yourself? Yeah,
no, that's very true. I was really lucky to be able to go, and the organizer of the conference was he was very good to me and waiving my fee as a journalist, and so I recognize what you're saying. It was is not something that everybody can readily attend. It also involves me traveling, all the way from San Francisco to Lisbon. So you're right. So for people who are spending time in their proverbial garages, building their own simulations and working away on the sheer joy of it, I think the best way for them to share their message is, I think, again, through coming together in things like Gratham. I think it's a terrific start, honestly, because what's going to happen is these, people who are working individually will begin to collaborate, and they will begin to develop things that will get to the level where people are really interested in them. They'll snowball, in a way, into projects like EvoGrid that I think has fantastic, I hate to keep coming back to it, but I think it has fantastic potential to be something that the public is really interested in. So things like that. It's really difficult for the garage hobbyist to get exposure, if that's what they want, public exposure on anything. I think no matter whether you work on model rockets, or whatever, it's difficult to get. So I think when you come together and you have a rocket convention, if you want, and all of a sudden, guys are showing up with rockets that are, 20 feet tall, approaching the speed of sound as they travel into the atmosphere, people start to pay attention. And I think that metaphor holds for the hobbyist community of artificial life on their own, launching small little artificial life rockets, if you want, in their garages or in their backyards or on their computers. They are not necessarily going to make the front page of USA Today, but when they come together and they do something that's greater than what they can achieve on their own, then you're talking. Now something real is, or not something real, it's always real, but now something big can really emerge that will really get the world's attention.
So this is an interesting point. In fact, you've made a couple there within the rocket metaphor, but certainly talking to the folks that started Gratham in Boston, they had an immense sense of historical reverence with regards to the Homebrew Computer Club in the Bay Area. And certainly Bruce and I have a legacy with regards to folks from the Homebrew Club as well. Bruce more than I do in the public eye, because obviously he has the DigiPart. But the thing that struck me, and I don't want to necessarily say Bruce privately, but certainly when you start interacting with folks that were at the original Homebrew, you get the sense that there were two guys that really made it from that crew. But there were tens of additional people that all had contributive components to that. I mean, talking to Bruce about Gratham and certainly talking to the folks in Boston, I don't think they necessarily see the same kind of, I don't want to say potential, but the same model is not going to be true, I think, with Gratham in terms of what happened with the Homebrew Computer Club. But the other important thing, which the rocket metaphor slightly breaks down, is the internet, and this is certainly what started me in developing software full stop, is an amazing mechanism to get, even if you're in Zimbabwe or South Africa or Central Australia or Chile or anywhere in the world, to put software online and immediately get a user base through going to particular download sites and things like that. So the metaphor with regards to the rocket convention doesn't necessarily have to be a physical metaphor. I think the problem...
No, it doesn't. You're absolutely right. It is a very loose metaphor in that sense. You have an instant, in a sense, the internet has allowed us to have an instant rocket convention, right? I mean, all of a sudden, people can instantly form a community.
But I think what interested me, I mean, I was developing an isolation with regards to Noble 8 for probably a 6-year period, in the period that Biota cooled down. And it was getting contacted by another artificial life developer. I was in the UK at the time, in Canada. And we had a shared set of experiences that were very similar in terms of our background reading, our background interests. We had completely divergent projects. But then I started tracking similar hobbyists and found that there was actually a very quiet, as you say, the rocket community had been off tinkering, building better rockets, but it was a means to approach them. The problem really is translating these kind of collectives into something which is accessible, firstly, by the science media and secondly, by the popular media. Can you think of any way to move from this virtual conference metaphor into something that, for example, New Scientist or Wired would be receptive to?
Yeah, I can. I think one of the main things that the artificial life community is not necessarily lacking, but maybe I don't know. I guess they are lacking right now is or are a set of evangelists. That's what you find in almost any movement that has become successful in the popular mind. Is people that are so passionate about it, and also they're not just passionate about what they do, they're passionate about getting it out to the public. Now, a guy like Bruce Damer is terrific for that reason. He has a huge computer museum. He's very well spoken. He's the type of guy that can, unfortunately, this is the reality of the media, he's the type of guy that can produce sound bites, produce things that are consumable. And he's not the only one. Inman Harvey, when I met him in Lisbon, we had a number of really interesting discussions, and to him it was probably child's play because he was teaching someone about artificial life who had no idea what was going on. But one thing that stuck in my mind right off the bat, right when I first sat down with him, was that he said, what we're doing here at this artificial life conference and what we do in our labs is different from what a lot of artificial intelligence researchers do when they're sitting down and sort of philosophizing and things. He said, they talk about theory of mind. We talk about theory of mind with a screwdriver. And I thought, when he said that, I thought, that's it right there, man. You just need to say that in front of a camera, and people will be like, wow, philosophy plus, perspiration. Bam. I mean, that's a package. He did it himself. And I think I don't know. He's been around for quite a while. I think he's been working on that for a while. And I don't know if he kind of says that a lot, but it's a good tagline. And that's the type of thing I really think you need. You need people who have those sorts of snappy phrases, if you want. They are one-offs. They aren't necessarily important to the field, but they are important to communicating what's going on in the field to people who don't necessarily have the time or indeed the inclination to understand all of the technical goings on within the field. So I think you need evangelists. I think you need people who are like Inman Harvey, who are like Bruce Damer, and I'm sure a handful of others, probably such as yourself. You're passionate about it. Clearly, you set up this podcast. You need those type of people like you to continue to just basically pound the pavement.
So what's interesting in what you're describing is that you talk about personal connections that you've made, and you talk about the power that you've gauged from actually being in Inman Harvey's company or talking to Bruce Damer or these kind of things. I think what fascinates me going through the artificial life community is I started with a similar sense of wonder, and then I started to realize that actually it wasn't just a few voices. It was, in fact, a chorus of amazing people. I think in the San Francisco group you will have exposure to people that haven't had the degree of exposure that they should have had. I'm thinking here specifically of Jeffrey Ventrella, but what I'm finding from Dan Gill's work, the two Scots' work as well in completely different directions at Gratham. There are just a wide variety of people just in Gratham, San Francisco, that I think you'll be very receptive to. I mean, Jeffrey Ventrella is the kind of fellow who, you spend an hour with him and it's like you've spent a day with him in some regard. And I think cool. The amazing thing about the artificial life community is it's just such a bunch of polymaths that, you feel blessed to be in their presence, even in their virtual presence, even to talk to them for a period of time. And what you're telling me, you sound like the kind of person that's going to be very receptive to those kind of relationships. Talking about this specifically, as you go to your first Gratham San Francisco meeting, what do you see your role as being? Are you a casual observer? Are you a journalist reporting on Gratham? Or are you someone who's going to instigate artificial life developers to be more proactive, communicating with journalists? What do you see your role as being?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my default state as a journalist is, or my ground state is fly on the wall. So, especially in a situation where I know that I'm far outclassed by people's knowledge of their field, which is almost always. I go to conferences a lot, and I sit with experts, and I am a non-expert. So I start listening, and I guess I just say what occurs to me, and hopefully that can be a provocative question that may change the discussion, or it may just be an education. The answer may just be an education for me. So I start with that, and then, like I said, I hope to get to advance to the point where I can ask a reasonably intelligent question that people want to discuss, and that's the most I can hope for, I think. But first and foremost, it's for me to go there and learn, and indeed, as you say, to engage with these people who I know are, and here's another thing. I know that these people, when I meet them, I will be fascinated by them, and I would love to spend hours with them and maybe even days. But I think another reason, to come back to what we were talking about earlier, why artificial life community may have some trouble getting their message out is you are a community of very hardworking individuals. You don't have time to be your own PR agent. And when I say, you need evangelists, well, you can't do everything, can you? When you're busy trying to explore all these fascinating questions, you don't necessarily have time to come up for air. And I agree with you. I've been at meetings where I've found people who I thought, you are made to be in a newspaper. You are made to be, on the Discovery Channel. And where the heck have you been? And the answer is in front of a computer or in the lab or in the field or whatever they're doing. That's what they're doing. And they're not spending their time, talking to people like me. I really wish they would. But that was just another point that I wanted to add to the fact that, evangelism is tough to come by. And there's a good reason for it.
Certainly. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of the embedded Second Life journalist. I think his name is Warner James Au or something like that. But he was actually embedded in Second Life for a period of time and wrote as an embedded journalist. I put out through the Great blog that maybe we need embedded journalists in artificial life projects as well in order to convey the day-to-day wonder. I mean, this seems to be what you're advocating here.
To some extent, yeah. I got to say, though, and it's a very fine balancing act. It's a delicate one because an embedded journalist is terrific, but he or she can find themselves in a situation where they lose a sense of perspective of what their audience is interested in. And unfortunately, the reality of communicating with an audience means you have to understand what they want. Sometimes it can come out in a way that makes you say, oh, God, here's this story that's just pandering to the lowest common denominator. And you think, pick your favorite story, that's just driven you crazy in this way in USA Today or New York Times or any other piece of mass media, right? Or, CNN, whatever. Happens all the time. But what outlets like that are in constant touch with their audience are doing successfully is maintaining that perspective on what their audience wants. And now, for better or worse, and sometimes worse. But an embedded journalist can lose that. And I think that's where the balancing act comes in, is to be close to your subjects, close to the people, in my case, close to the artificial life community, and, let me indulge my inner geek and speak with you and learn about your work as much as possible. But at the end of the day, I have to come home to my desk and think, what am I going to tell the people who are going to read my story? What is the story? And why do they want to read it? I have to kind of beat myself up that way. And I think journalists have to do that. They have to beat themselves up and say, look, really, why do people care about this? And you have to, why do a lot of people care about it who aren't doing it every day? And so that's the pitfall of an embedded journalist. That said, there are people who are embedded, who are, experts in the field, who can get that whole perspective and they maintain it all the time. Those are the rare people that I think should be the ones who get anointed, officially or not, to be the evangelists, to be the ones who go out there and spread the word. But I believe they also have to be passionate about it, and they have to want to do it. Otherwise, it won't succeed.
Certainly, and I mean, what was characterized with the Second Life journalism, as you've noted, is a degree of saturation, a degree of annoying stories, but it certainly kept it in the media.
Yeah,
as well.
It did, yeah. And, now that was that journalist affiliated with Reuters, or was that a different, there's the Reuters bureau that was set up in Second Life too, right?
Well, I'm not really, his relationship with regards to Linden Labs changed through the period that he was a journalist as well. I'm not sure whether he left Linden Labs and then was picked up by Reuters or what the relationship was. I think he's published a book now, so maybe that's the best source. But you've kind of talked about this through a series of the questions that I've asked you, but certainly in the contemporary artificial life development community, even the definition of artificial life it's a moving target. But in terms of communicating artificial life to a broader community, from what you've experienced so far, what do you think is the strongest message contemporary artificial life communicates?
I think it's the insight into I think it's two-pronged, honestly. I think the best stories that I've been able to come up with, and I'm sure someone else could find other things that are probably even more fascinating. And there are a lot of depths out there in the artificial life community that need yet to be plumbed by journalists. And that's again, they come back to the embed thing, where I say an embedded journalist could lose perspective. A journalist who's at his or her desk every day can lose perspective in the opposite direction and not be willing to plumb the depth enough. So this is, again, the balancing act. But I think the message that artificial life has is twofold. One is from an engineering perspective. Artificial life simulation has the ability to do things through evolutionary algorithms and neural networks and all of these different technologies to provide applications that literally we couldn't dream of, right? With an evolutionary algorithm, you can get a computer to think about things that you would just never you would never come up with, and engineering solutions that a human just literally would never dream of. And I think that's the sort of pragmatic part of the message, to say, look, we can do things. We can build robotic controllers. We can build we can come up with new patentable radio antennas, whatever, that will improve life and improve the way humans interact with technology. Now that's one thing. The other thing is that I think is really, and this is the philosophical stickiness, right? Is the insight that it can provide into the natural world, how life systems interact. Those are things that are just even systems ecologists are just beginning to scratch the surface of, and to be able to sit down and look at these in a quantifiable way, even if it's imperfect because it's a simulation and it only represents our best understanding of the system that we're modeling. Still, you're potentially providing just stunning insights into how an ant colony works, the behaviors of the emergent properties of fireflies, whatever. These are things that are fascinating, and they will snowball into stories, turn into stories that people who are, I'm sitting here in a mall right now, actually in San Francisco. The people around me will want to hear about, and because insight into the natural world, people move through their lives to some extent with blinders on. We all do. We have to, because we can't take in all of the information around us. It's impossible, right? Our visual system and our hearing and everything, all of our senses have evolved to filter out almost everything, right? So we spend our lives with tunnel vision. But when you focus and sit down and look at something new, like an exotic flower or a strange animal that has some strange behavior, and somebody from the artificial life community comes along and says, well, you know what, actually I've looked at that, and I can tell you this about it. And it's really not what you'd expect, but this is the case. We found this. All of a sudden, that person who is now focusing on something they've never seen before is going, wow, what an insight into this, this plant or this ant colony or whatever organism or system that's been modeled, maybe even an infant. Wow, look at isn't this interesting how this infant's mind works, that it's doing this strange thing. And people who have no experience in the field will gain a really profound sense of satisfaction. I think they can gain a really profound sense of satisfaction from being fed that really interesting piece of information that just changes the way that they look at this one particular part of the world.
So I'd like to take that one step further and initially touch on what Ayman Harvey said with regards to identifying difference. And what fascinates me developing Noble 8 for 13 years is that when I came to the technical singularity, I was able to interact on a very high level with regards to philosophers in that movement and discredit components of what they were saying. And what interested me with regards to simulation as a concept was that actually it moved out of the natural sciences very quickly into things that were, in some regard, the social sciences, in some regard, related to psychology and things completely outside the original remit of historical artificial life. And I think what you've touched on with regards to the initial stickiness of the biological sciences is also extraordinarily philosophically sticky outside of the biological sciences as well, to the point of questions of existence. Are we entities in a simulation? What are the characteristics that these simulations would have? You know, basically hammering right on Kurzweil's door in that regard. But also, the intimacy that you have with regards to computation gives you, in some regard, a different set of building blocks from the biological sciences. And here I want to reference the ongoing discussion that we're having with Dick Gordon, who's an embryonologist and a radiologist in Manitoba in Canada, fascinating fellow. He's been connected with the artificial life community for, through Biota, but also through primary contact with artificial life developers for, a decade and a half, if not more. But his idea is creating new methods of biology that come through computation as opposed to chemical modeling or these kind of things, using a different framing. And I think what's fascinating with artificial life is you have, in one sense, an ability to look into the natural sciences or the biological sciences or the components that were originally part of the simulation, but then you can also look out to the things that are making claims that then into what artificial life is also exploring. So this philosophical stickiness, in fact, has the ability to kind of explode and cover everything. And I think that's the fascinating part of contemporary artificial life, and certainly one of the secondary aims that I'm trying to push through Biota Live is actually getting artificial life practitioners thinking about how, not just so they form a narrative with regards to the biological sciences or things that have traditionally been associated with artificial life, but they actually use it to instigate discussions with philosophers, psychologists, people traditionally outside of the kind of folk that would be talking about artificial life or even interested in artificial life. So in terms of maximizing the stickiness, I think we're in an amazing position currently through contemporary computing, also through the wide variety of theories and ideas that are floating around that touch on aspects of artificial life to actually explode this sticky component. In some regard, what I'm asking you through this is how can artificial life developers make your job easier? Is it just a matter of getting in contact and talking to you for a couple of hours? Do we need to change the way we're communicating? Do we need to seek out people such as yourself? How can we make your job easier?
Well, I think that we're taking steps towards that right now. You and I are getting to know one another. You've just told me about a Canadian researcher who sounds fascinating in his approach to computation and biology. I would love to know more about that. So right there, I mean, I'm not going to say it is or it isn't, but potentially that's something I would like to investigate.
Dick Gordon has appeared in previous Biota Lives. He's in the archive, and you can certainly, just by looking through his name through the podcast, go back and find him. Both Bruce and I, and probably half a dozen other people of the artificial life community, have written in Dick's book that will be possibly published at the end of this year, possibly next year, depending on how the editing goes. It's 900 pages. But it addresses the issue of the apparent contemporary debate with regards to science and religion, and ironically, the artificial life practitioners are the folks that Dick wants to hang out with, as opposed to the wide variety of other people that he's brought into this. And Dick's own insight, I mean, it's particularly due to Dawkins, because he was one of the early artificial life instigators. Obviously, artificial life developers have some connection, either explicitly or implicitly, with regards to the contemporary, whatever you want to call it, the contemporary mess, which seems to make a wide variety of people a wide variety of money, not actually associated with science primarily, but kind of skirting around it very neatly. So I think what's fascinating is people such as Dick are a part of the community and they're instigating it. So maybe what we need to do is, I'm not sure if you heard as you came in on the call, but I've pressed 1,000 CDs of the Biota podcast. I sent 400 to Artificial Life 11. I've sent them all over the place, and if you have a group in San Francisco that would benefit from 25 or 50 of these CDs with the view that they're to be passed on once people have listened to them and subscribed. We're trying all means necessary to get the Artificial Life message out through Biota in terms of stickiness, and also getting folks such as Dick Gordon. There was also a paleobiologist we had on called Roy Plotnick, who again has been connected to Biota thanks to Bruce Tamer for well more than a decade. But the scientists that come back into the Biota community are really good instigators. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about having practicing scientists have very open and fluid thought patterns in the artificial life community, is that they tend to instigate artificial life developers in a variety of directions as well.
Yeah, and you speak about instigating, and I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about instigating in a different way, and just being provocative in a very general sense. That's what Richard Dawkins has become the master of, hasn't he? I mean, it's fascinating to me that Dawkins is in a way one of the old guard of artificial life community, because no one knows that about him who is not in the artificial life community, or almost no one. I mean, very few people do. It's news to me, that's for sure.
Well, there's a phrase that I coined through this podcast where there are no founding fathers in artificial life, there are just deadbeat dads. And there are a number of people who were part of the early artificial life development that haven't paid their child support for more than a decade. So, yeah, there are probably a variety of names that you never would have thought of had any association with artificial life moving into the community. I mean, it would be wonderful to have you on a regular basis to kind of get progressive updates as you work your way through the artificial life community, because certainly from this initial conversation you've identified your immense sense of wonder, which I think we all share in some regard, but the kind of progressive updates would be fascinating to hear you as you talk to Dick Gordon, or talk to Jeffrey Ventrella, or how you do through Gratham and San Francisco. I mean, what Bruce is doing currently, I have a joke that Bruce is my avatar in the real world, because he goes to all these things and kind of reports back to the Biota community. I think, aside from Gratham Netherlands, he has attended all the other Grathams so far, and as you've noted, he has an amazing insight into a wide variety of folk that are doing a wide variety of development.
Well, I think in a general sense, when you talk about Bruce and his ability to go out there and be one of these evangelists, he really is. But I'd love to come back to Dawkins just for a second. For better or worse, I think scientists and researchers as a whole, and indeed even the hobbyists, they're excited by artificial life, and there's a reason for it, because it challenges our assumptions about the natural world, and it challenges our assumptions about how life works. For instance, foraging theory, we don't think of organisms as having this sort of internal compass, or at least most people don't think about organisms having this internal compass of how to break up their effort in terms of trying to find resources, food, mating, these very general impulses. But artificial life researchers have begun to put these pieces together into something that actually does resemble a foraging organism. And you think, good Lord, I mean, that's incredibly provocative, right? Because it challenges this idea that life is monolithic and mysterious and always will be. And science is like that. Science is always challenging that and trying to find answers to these questions. But I think that what we internalize, and I'm using the we pronoun again, that I shouldn't be, but what the community internalizes, and people tend to internalize, is this sense of wonder and the sense of really provocation, really why people do it, why they do the research. And a guy like Richard Dawkins has externalized that. He's made it explicit instead of implicit. And when you do that, all of a sudden you get people's dander up. He's become an absolute lightning rod for controversy, but to his financial benefit, but also to the benefit of the movement of Darwinism and evolutionism as a whole, and indeed science as a whole. He's become a sort of, he's a person that draws people to his cause, and his words have become sort of rallying cries for some people, and for some people he's going too far. He takes it too far to insult a different part of the evolution argument, the pro or anti-evolution and the religious movement. He goes a little too far, and I know that's another conversation.
But I think also there are biologists that would say that he doesn't talk enough about epigenetics. He doesn't talk enough about social structures. I think Dawkins is a fascinating person, but with 2 minutes remaining.
With just 2 minutes left.
Yeah,
okay.
the point you made with regards to fossicking was made by Roy Plotnick, the paleobiologist, as the point where intelligence was eked out in the kind of pre-Cambrian, Cambrian period. And I think this fossicking as the origins of intelligence is a fascinating thing to think about in terms of linking what we're doing. So with 1 minute remaining, we have no topic set for next week. So if folks want to email me, tom@noble8.com, we'll put forward the topic. Michael, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you. Do not be a stranger to Biota Live. You're always welcome on to talk, and ideally we'll have other artificial life developers to convey their wonder in future conversations. You've given an amazing insight this evening, so I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to chat with you.
Happy to be here, Tom. It's been a lot of fun.
Next week, submit a topic, tom@noble8.com. Thank you all very much for listening in.